ironclads in the Civil War. They were finally building boats with iron cladding on the wooden boats to protect the boats from artillery and stuff like that. Well, as early as the 1812s, the War of 1812, they had invented the cotton clad, where they'd taken cotton bales and stuffed cotton bales around critical parts of the boat so that if any incoming artillery would come in there, that would be absorbed by the cotton bales and that would save the ship. So they basically created two cotton clads in Rome, the Alpharetta and the Laura Moore, and under the darkness of night, stillness of night, they tried to sneak away. Now, if a steamboat, you got to have a fire, and a fire is going to generate sparks. So sparks coming from the fire, coming out the stacks, kind of gave away their plans, even though they had doused all the lights on the vessel and trying to sneak out of town. And in Rome, you head straight towards Shorter Hill to begin with, then you make the curve around Horse Lake Creek Road, Horse Lake Creek, and then you got about another 1.5 miles or 2 miles where you're pretty much in vision. And that's what they were doing. They were steaming down the Coosa, making that turn, and trying to get out of the way. But the Yankees up on Shorter Hill saw them doing that, and they opened fire. So they were fired on. We had basically a battle. They were not armed, but because they had gone to that preparation of getting the cotton strategically located, they were able to survive. They did not get demolished or anything, and they cruised on down as far as basically Greensport. Now I told you Greensport, that's the end of the navigation. That's about 130 miles from Rome by way of river. By way of Crow, it's a lot shorter, but by way of river, it's about 130 miles if Greensport were still there. Well, one of the boats stayed there, but the second of the boats, the Alpharetta, the Laura Moore, took advantage of high water conditions. Normally that section of the river from Greensport to Wetumpka was not navigable, but under extreme high water conditions, which they were having at the time, Captain Lay was willing to take the chance, and he actually navigated the full length of the Coosa River. So kind of a heroic thing. He served out the Confederacy, for the Confederacy in the Wetumpka area and on the Alabama River for about a year. Of course, the war was nearly over in 1864. It was a year later it was over, and the Laura Moore was serving out there. So it actually survived the going down the full length of the Coosa. The only boat that was ever able to do that. After the war was over, he again took advantage of the high water level and brought it back. And so it actually came back to Rome in 1866, I believe, and started serving on the Coosa River again. But then after return, it was sold. And every time a boat is sold or changes owners or something like that, it ends up getting renamed. So in any case, the Laura Moore became the Clarabelle. That's the chair, isn't it? So that's the story of the only time that the Coosa River was navigated is full length. So it's kind of an interesting story. The other ones that were around at that time was there was an Enterprise was a towboat. Some of these boats were just used for smaller rivers. They were smaller. They would like on the Chattooga River, there was Cornwall Furnace where they created pig iron, and of course this time what made Rome really popular with the Yankees is we were in the process of manufacturing cannon with the Noble Brothers foundry. So the feds wanted to put the Noble Brothers out of business. So but the Enterprise was just basically a towboat. It would barge the pig iron from the Cornwall Furnace down the Chattooga River until it got to the Coosa River, and then the Coosa River steamboats would then bring it the rest of the way to Rome. So it was a lot of different steamboats over the years. Again, that was one of the first towboats. Let's see what we didn't. They weren't all steamboats. I was in researching. You know, one of the things I do in my spare time is I read old newspapers. I'm right now reading the 1875 Rome Tri-Weekly Courier. You'd be surprised what you can learn by reading old newspapers. But I found out that in 1861, in June of 1861, there was actually a sailboat that was trying to create a market on the Oostenaula River by bringing freight from Calhoun down to Rome and to go back. So it wasn't even a steam-powered vessel, but a small sailboat. First time out, it hit a rock and sunk. Well, second time out, it hit a rock and sunk. So it was a short-lived enterprise, but we did have a sail freighter on Rome. So I asked people, if April showers bring Mayflowers, what do Mayflowers bring? Freight to Rome on the Oostenaula River. So that's, the Toodles is another interesting piece of trivia. The Toodles was taking advantage of the poor market distribution of goods and services after the Civil War. The price of things in Rome was a lot better than the price of things in Center Alabama. So an owner had a small boat. He called it the Toodles. It was a propeller boat. And he started floating from Rome to Center and Cedar Bluff, Alabama, trying to take advantage of the differences. He was basically a barter boat. He did that once or twice, and then the merchants in Center and Cedar Bluff got a little fluffed off at him, and the fact that he didn't have a business license for the state of Alabama, and the fine was such that he went out of business. He didn't do it anymore. So the Toodles was a piece of trivia, but it was part of our river history. Now the peak years. How am I doing on time? Okay. The peak years. The railroads were spreading out. They were getting the problem with the Coosa River and the navigability of the Coosa River. Coosa was a very shallow, fast-moving stream, and like today in Rome, Georgia, we can't have the Roman holiday on the river because it's just too shallow. The water, we haven't had any rain. There's hardly any water in the Coosa. The level at the lock and dam is 10 foot. If the lock wasn't there, it'd probably be 1 foot. The problem with the steamboats on the Coosa is they couldn't reliably keep a schedule. If the water got too low, the boats couldn't go downstream. Or if the water got too high, the boats couldn't go downstream. And of course, if somebody's traveling on business or wants to go somewhere, he'd like to be able to plan on being there. So the railroads eventually had that advantage. They could say, I'll get you there on time, and you won't have any problems. You'll be able to keep that schedule. The steamboats weren't so much. In the wintertime, the river may have iced over, and they couldn't go because of the ice. Or you may be on the river coming back feeling perfectly well and perfectly safe and get iced in the wintertime. Or hit a sandbar and get stuck on the sandbar and have to wait for somebody to help you off or work your way off finally. So that's just the way the river boats were. The rivers were navigable under ideal conditions, but the river levels can be too low. The Ohio River was the same way. Until they get the series of dams built down the Ohio River, it wasn't navigable reliably. It was just the way it was. There was a lot of effort through the 1870s and 1880s to make the Coosa navigable, add the dams, add canals, connect it to the Tennessee system, and do all kinds of really great things, but they didn't get done in time, or they didn't get done at all. So they weren't successful. But anyway, the steamboats were peaking out now. The railroads were spreading out, there were little tentacles everywhere, but the steamboats were still queen. And in 1873 to 1883, this list of steamboats here was really the queens of the Coosa. After these guys, another one came on, the John J. Say, which became another fantastically good-looking vessel that was there. But by far and above, the Magnolia has a reputation of being the finest vessel on the Coosa River. Got a picture of it a little bit later. The Mary Carter was a smaller boat. The Mary Carter was designed to go up the Oostenaula River. When the water level was too low on the Coosa River so that the Magnolia couldn't get down, the Mary Carter would take that route. The mail had to go through, so you switched off your steamboats and you might use the Mary Carter. In response to the success of the Magnolia, the Sidney P. Smith was built in 1877. Now the Sidney P. Smith was another good-looking vessel. It had some gingerbread on it. It was a fancy-looking vessel. The only problem with the Sidney P. Smith was it was built by a Mississippi River boat builder. He was used to building boats for the Mississippi River, and the Mississippi River and the Coosa River have different personalities. You have to have a wider boat with a shallow draft to go down the Coosa, and that wasn't the case on the Mississippi. The Mississippi, you could give you a lot more leeway in terms of how much water you're going to have underneath you. So the Sidney P. Smith was designed improperly for the Coosa. Although it was a great-looking vessel, it could never really handle the water conditions on the Coosa. It squatted, it scraped bottom, and if you want to get a sinking feeling, and you know you're in a wooden boat and you're scraping bottom, how's that going to feel to you? When you think about it, a steamboat is made out of wood, and it's a steamboat, so you're going to propel it with steam. So first thing you got to do is build a fire. And now you got a fire on a wooden boat. That's a little scary. And when you're going to use the fire, you're going to heat up water to generate some steam. So you got this big old pressure vessel up there, like a big old pressure cooker. You're heating this water up and generating steam at about 150 to 250 pounds per square inch pressure. So now you have a wooden boat with a fire and a big steam bomb alongside it. And I showed you the picture of a packet boat where the freight goes on the same deck as the fire. What are you going to haul as freight? In this area, cotton. Is cotton flammable? Yeah. And you're having sparks come off your fire going up the stacks, and the stacks, the spark come out and may fall back down on it. So you got yourself a recipe for disaster on a wooden vessel, on a fire and a steam bomb and flammable cargo. Steamboats didn't last all that long. They were maybe, the Magnolia lasted about 10 years. Some of them lasted less than that. The Dixie, I think, lasted about 6. They would either hit bottom, scrape bottom, sink, blow up, or we didn't have a lot of blow ups. We just had some fires on board, or a lot of things go wrong with them. But the thing was, the economics of it was that if you had a steamboat, you spent about $4,000 or $5,000 to build a steamboat in those days. But if something happened to that steamboat, what you would do was salvage everything you could off of that steamboat. I told you the water level was shallow, so if your boat sunk, you couldn't reclaim. Well, you just retrieve the boilers, retrieve the engines, whatever you can off it, the whistle, whatever you can off of it, and put it on your new boat. And that'd be all right, because the new boat was going to cost you about that. You could pay for it in a year. I mean, you could make it on freight and passengers, and maybe the mail contract, you could get it paid back in a year. That's a pretty good investment if you get get your return on investment in a year. So that's what happened a lot. So the steamboats did not have a long life, but they did. And some of the inequities that you get if you have a big boat and it sinks and you decide you want to put well, maybe you might have a smaller boat. It sank, and you want to take some of the equipment off of that and put it on this, but you were making enough money, you want to make it a bigger boat. So now you might have mismatched equipment. There was one, in fact, it was the Etowah Bill, I think, that had her whistle was so large, it might have been from another vessel, that they brought that whistle over from another vessel. Every time they blew the whistle, it used all the steam up, and they couldn't do it. You know, when you're a steamboat captain, the first thing you do to let people know you're leaving the wharf is blow a long blast on the whistle. Well, when they did that with the Etowah Bill, they didn't have any steam to leave the wharf. So, and one time during the Civil War, I think it was the same vessel that the flange that was holding the steam whistle on there. The flange broke, the whistle blew off, and all the steam escaped. So, you know, they weren't engineering masterpieces by any means. They were just learning. You know, a lot of it was a learning process. If you've ever heard of the Sultana, Yeah, the worst steamboat disaster happened right after the Civil War, and 2,500 people lost their lives because that boat was not maintained properly and had poor steam integrity and everything else. So 2,500 people lost their lives. Nothing much was in the paper about that, because at the same time a fellow by the name of Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated, so he had the headlines. But anyway, the Magnolia and the Sidney P. Smith were big boats, and they were quite good. There's a picture of the Magnolia. You can see the relative size of the people on board. This is the freight deck. This is the passenger deck. And there's many, many times where the people have left Rome on an excursion to go downriver to